Hello, welcome back to the GM's Guide. I'm your host, Dan Felder, your kind and merciful GM. As always, if you appreciate this podcast, well, I'd really appreciate a 5-star review, like, subscription, or whatever else lets you show your support on whatever platform you're picking this up on. It won't take you long. In today's episode, we will be continuing the step-by-step creation of the Raven Shadow campaign, figuring out how to build an adventure around our last protagonist, the 4th player character, the legendary Ian Guard. After that, I'm going to walk you through how I build the basis for all the characters and culture to come, as well as a powerful soundtrack for the campaign. Now, if you're new to this series, you'll want to jump back to episode 21, where our case study started, and I laid out the foundation for all the stuff we're talking about now. For the rest of us, let's dive back in. The 4th player I invited to Raven Shadow is Ian. Ian is by far my most loyal player. He played in my first campaign, and by this point, I fully expect him to play in my last. He's played in more of my adventures than anyone else, even when it used to mean driving up from a different college every single week. He also goes deeper into my settings than anyone else I've ever gamed with. Almost every day in between adventures, I'll get a message from him saying something like, "I've got an idea. How much would it cost to enchant our ship's sails to be fireproof?" And from that, the email spirals out a whole host of possible upgrades, negotiations, and other madness. Things get even more intense with the characters he's not currently playing. I've mentioned that he's played in a lot of my campaigns, right? Now, at the conclusion of those campaigns, the characters that you finish usually enter the setting as NPCs. In future adventures, they're technically under my control now, as the major figures in the world, but I'm always happy to gather ideas from their original players about what they might be getting up to. In Ian's case, one of his characters was the heir to a once great empire who ended his journey by reclaiming his kingdom. Good stuff. For years, real years, years in real time, afterward, Ian sent me endless documents brimming with the details for how he's setting up his kingdom's government, election processes, religious customs, various laws, industries he's investing in, even whole proposals for trade agreements with neighboring nations. I didn't ask him for any of this. He just wanted to do it all on his own. So bearing in mind that level of detail, passion, background, and dedication on things that barely matter to the campaign, I could not wait to see his answers to the character questionnaire. I've never been so disappointed. Ian's questionnaire was by far the shortest and shallowest of any of the players. It barely ran a page. If you remember, Chad's own answers filled 5 pages. 5 pages! And that was just the questionnaire. There was other stuff he told me. Included in the email of Ian's that he just sent me was a dose of heavy skepticism, commenting that the questionnaire seemed completely pointless, and it wasn't worth the time trying to dig into characters this way. He didn't know what I was going for, he said. What? I mean, this is Ian. This is the guy who sent me 6 pages on a single trade agreement. Why is he only sending me 1 on his core character for a full campaign? After thinking about it, though, I started realizing something. Ian does not play games like a writer. He plays them like an adventurer. Because Ian has always reacted more strongly to the triumphs and defeats of my campaigns, has always hated the villains so intensely, and has always focused so deeply on learning the world, I'd assumed he was loving the stories themselves. But in reality, he was experiencing something different. I've said before, games aren't storytelling, they're story living. Ian fully inhabits his characters as extensions of himself in an RPG. A triumph in the game is a triumph for him, not just his character. Ian doesn't play in my campaigns to explore a world, he plays to win. Once he figures out his character's motivations, achieving those goals in the most spectacular way possible is how he wins the game. As such, adding more distinctions and qualifications to his characters is meaningless. All it does is make them more different from him. It's him in the game. The character is just a skin of whatever motivations or cultural associations are required to make him make sense in this world. He's playing to win, not to write. A good way to explain this distinction is to look at how the player would respond to a triumphant tragedy. Gabe, the player who created Nathan Sky, the cowardly husband now seeking redemption, is going to love the idea of his character sacrificing his life to redeem himself and save his family. That's a great story. And in the campaign's finale, spoiler alert, he embraces this fate and he loves it. I even hinted to him that it might be possible for Nathan to accomplish his goal without dying, but Gabe didn't want to hear about it. The triumphant death was a better story for all the reasons I mentioned 2 episodes ago. He preferred Nathan to die. Ian would not react this way if I put him in that situation. For Ian, dying in the process of accomplishing your goal isn't exactly winning. That's more like a tie, maybe even a loss. Your character did die after all. Ian wants to win. And from my perspective, that is awesome. It must sound like Ian is getting a weaker experience, but that's not true. Ian is usually the most strongly affected of anyone at my gaming table. If something happens, a betrayal happens, Ian is going to feel it the most strongly, despite being not a very emotional person in normal life. This is because he doesn't look at defeats as appropriate artistically. He genuinely feels defeated. He's always completely in touch with his character because his characters have his own personality, and he wants what they want. That's how he's going to win, after all, getting his character what his character wants. This is why he spent forever outlining trade agreements for his empire, because it would make him richer. Even though he's not controlling that character anymore, he can still imagine winning by increasing that character's influence. It would continue the goals of his original character. And that's also why he could not care less about the questionaire's artistic motivations. He would spend days trying to figure out how they could fireproof his ship, but he couldn't spend minutes trying to figure out a character's artistic goals. That's not connected to what he cares about. This is enormously valuable information for a writer and dungeon master, because it tells me that I don't need to spend my narrative budget on certain things. If I glossed over a tearful reunion between Nathan and his daughter Crystal, then Gabe, Nathan's player, is going to feel horribly disappointed. He's looking forward to exploring those scenes and interacting with this character. That's a great moment for him to be a writer, to really express himself, and to create a powerful moment he can be proud of. For Ian, this scene would most likely be a chore to wade through. How do you win a tearful reunion scene with a tactical logic? That's not the experience he's looking for. I needed to set up high-stakes tactical problems for Ian, a clear goal with big consequences. This could also double as the core threat everyone was ultimately working towards, with their personal stories happening to tie together toward the larger goal. Now, Ian's character questionnaire was not blank, it just wasn't deep. He had submitted a character named Baloran, a warrior of the Sacred Empire. This guy had half a dozen conflicting motivations that I basically ignored. But Ian's answer to what he wanted to get out of playing his character was really useful. He said that he was interested in playing a character that started off working against the players, but ultimately learned the error of his ways. This is a classic disillusionment plot. In a disillusionment plot, a character strongly embraces a certain philosophy or worldview. Then comes the disillusionment. An action occurs that proves the protagonist was wrong in her worldview, that she's been unknowingly doing bad things for a long time. Because this worldview was so important to her, a protagonist now needs to rediscover themselves. In the climax, the protagonist ultimately proves they've changed by fighting against their former worldview. For example, a common structure usually works like this. The protagonist might be a skilled warrior who fights for her empire against the evil goblins, because goblins are evil. During a battle, she's captured by the enemy. However, she's not eaten alive like she was told she would be, and has an opportunity to learn about the goblins by spending time with them. Captured, but, still surrounded by them. In the process, she discovers that she was wrong. Goblins are not evil. This significantly changes her core identity, which causes her character to grow. At the end of the story, she plays a key role in defending her new goblin friends against her former allies, either by brokering a lasting peace or by killing the jerk in charge of the genocide. Bellerin's plot is therefore very easy to set up. He starts off as a knight of the Sacred Empire, secretly working against the rest of the group, but becomes disillusioned with them at some point in the campaign. In his climax, which will naturally take place at the end of the campaign, he'll ultimately stand against the Sacred Empire. So, remember what the Sacred Empire, by the way, is our group of religious fanatics that are basically on a crusade in the shadows of the land, but are themselves corrupted and themselves not such great people. So, What does the Sacred Empire have to do with the Jester's haunted island? We've got a lot of villains so far. We've got the Shade, we've got the Lich Catherine, the Jester himself wanting to reclaim his throne, and now we've got the Sacred Empire. This could easily be a mess if we aren't careful. Luckily, I've read my P.G. Wodehouse. In his extraordinary comic novel, The Code of the Woosters, Jeeves to the Rescue, P.G. Wodehouse ties together half a dozen competing subplots in a hilarious webwork that all has one focus: a silver cow creamer. There are two incredibly rich and influential characters in the story, both of whom obsessively collect old silver, and this cow creamer would be the jewel of either of their collections. They want it desperately, and anyone who wants a favor from these incredibly rich and powerful men, therefore wants it too. They're basically genies who will grant you a wish if you can get them their cow creamer. This concept, this plot device that everybody wants, is often called a MacGuffin. It's incredibly useful for weaving complex narratives with a wide variety of characters and plot lines. For example, guess what the MacGuffin in Game of Thrones is? You probably got it right. It's the throne. It's pretty clear what Ravenshadow's MacGuffin would be: the Jester's Scepter. Nikolai's scepter is the fabled artifact that he used to control all the shadows in Ravenswalk, despite what their current lords might desire. It would give you ultimate power over the dark magic in the setting, though you'd also become corrupt in the process. This is the type of prize that serves as a great MacGuffin. Everyone is going to want it, either to use it or to keep it out of the wrong hands. The Sacred Empire would be no exception. I've already established that the Sacred Empire is willing to do bad things for good reasons, including working with some of the darker powers in the setting. Though mostly as a higher-up thing, most of their rank-and-file people would not necessarily know about this, which would fit well into the disillusionment plot. The Jester's Scepter would be exactly the sort of thing they'd want to abuse. It's a great reason for them to come to the island, and it's a great reason for Baloran, Ian's character, to ultimately oppose them, or a great way for him to ultimately oppose them. If he starts by wanting to get the scepter for his bosses, after he learns more about them, or something that ultimately realizes that they are wrong, and he was wrong for following them, a great disillusionment plot could turn on its climax as him ensuring that they never get the scepter. I also mentioned last time that it would be a fantastic ending for the players to lift all the islands of Ravenshadows above the cloud layer for the first sunrise, on the idea being that the light breaking through the magical clouds, because they go through it by lifting up above the magical clouds, would destroy all the shadow magic. I mentioned as well that I would look for a way to make this plausible, because that's a really crazy, lifting a whole island chain above the clouds. Well, the scepter is a way to make that plausible. Complete control over the shadow magic and all the islands, that could easily be established as something capable of mass island levitation. Now I know the core motivations of our various villains. Catherine, Nathan's wife and the Lich in charge of the island right now, will be doing something bad with her new power, now that she's gotten control of the scepter. This will call the attention of the Sacred Empire and our heroes. The Jester will want to reclaim his scepter, which Catherine used to depose him by stealing it from him, and the Sacred Empire will be sending a military force to the island for the same purpose. The campaign will end with the threat of the scepter being concluded. Assuming the players triumph, the scepter will either be destroyed or purified to a vessel of light. This works very, very well, and it's a high-stakes power struggle that will fascinate Ian's tactical mind. He'll spend a good time wondering what he might be able to do with all that power if he got a hold of it, which of course is a great theme of temptation, as well as how to negate or nullify it when dealing with its current possessor. This gives him a lot of powerful figures he's going to want to have to outmaneuver or outthink, and they're going to be smart, intelligent, capable figures as well. This is a great tactical challenge, with a very high-stakes, powerful reward. My last note about Ian's character at this stage, according to my timestamps, is this: lots of comic relief. Why did I write that? Well, like I said before, a major mistake in many dark settings is to make everything sad, dark, depressing, grim. Our brains are tuned to look for contrasts. So just like we get used to heat after living in Florida, we get used to grimdark when adventuring in grimdark. I once ran a game set in the My Little Pony universe. I swear I did this, and I kid you not, the tragic moments hit harder in that game than anything I've ever seen. One person, when something bad almost happened to a character he liked, actually said that he probably would have had to quit the campaign if that had happened afterwards. He didn't say that in the middle and try to blackmail me into saving the character. He just said afterward, I was sure I was going to have to quit that campaign when I thought she was going to die. This is a character who's been in my games before, and bad things have happened in those games too, to characters that he liked. However, it was My Little Pony. It's a happy, bright setting. It was the contrast, so seeing a loved character die made a huge impact. And I kid you not, more than one of the players, in the context of this game, and I've never seen this in any other game setting, was literally moved to song. They sang a song for the dead, more than one person. They were off key, but they were sincere. Likewise, I want to introduce light to contrast Raven Shadow's darkness so that the tragedy causes an actual emotional impact. Now, because Ian doesn't actually care that much about the emotional tone of the scene, outside of course the tactical puzzle that leads to triumph of victory or pain of defeat, I have a lot of emotional license with his story beats. This means I can use his moments as comic relief without sabotaging someone's serious plot. Raven Shadow is meant to be dark, because the heroes are meant to bring light to the campaign. Because of that oppressive darkness, I need to actively look for moments of humor and joy. They won't come up naturally, and I need them for the contrast. This is why I made that note. Baloran's scenes will have lots of comic relief, setting up the serious Ian as the straight man in an unwilling comedic duo with some deranged character or another. This will provide contrast for the overall campaign and a better experience for everybody. Okay, we have our roadmap. We've established each of our protagonists' likely character arcs, and our strategies for which type of events will drive them from the start of their arc all the way to the climactic endpoint. We've also established several major antagonists and their motivations. We've even got a great ending for the campaign in mind, bringing light to the Land of Shadows. Unfortunately, this is where our map runs out. You've probably noticed that my creative process throughout the campaign has been almost algebraic thus far. I've been determining what needs to be in the campaign in order to fulfill a certain goal, or to support a previously established need. For example, we need comedic moments because the campaign overall is dark. Therefore, we need comedic contrast in order to make the tragic moments land more powerfully. Ishida's love interest needs to appear as early as possible in order to give the relationship time to develop in a short campaign. These are both necessary choices. It has nothing to do with preference. It's a natural consequences of earlier decisions and design goals. I'm basically following a script. I always establish what needs to happen as early as possible, because those choices are not flexible, they're necessary. It also does something that I call taking the white space off the page. If you're intimidated by the big empty white piece of paper, getting some structure, some necessary needs laid out helps it be a lot easier to fill in the future ones. However, we've basically filled in every single necessary scene and character choice that we can so far. A chasm of possibilities is starting to open up. While we know Ishida's love interest needs to appear as early as possible, we don't know much else about her. In fact, we don't really know anything else about her. Should she be a confident warrior? A shy farm girl? Those are two completely opposite archetypes, but we don't have a clear criteria to evaluate them yet. Which is better? We don't really know. This is just the beginning. I'm going to have to find names for a whole bunch of characters and places. What should the naming culture be? You don't want something that sounds Polynesian right next to something that sounds German. It twangs in our ears. And what about plot events? I know I'm supposed to prepare a romance subplot with this character, but what kind? Romance is one of the most varied genres that there is. There are romantic comedies, dramas, soap operas, and a huge variety of subplots in other genres. That's just one of the subplots for my 4 characters. This is where a lot of writers and designers start to hit the dreaded writer's block. Often a project starts well, with the basic concept that inspired you, carrying the project through its initial steps. But there's only so much that initial burst of surface ideas can do. Then people start to get stalled. That's where we are now. Or it's where we would be except for one little detail. Honestly, I don't suffer from writer's block. I have not been seriously stalled for more than, half a day, few hours. in the last 6 years. Writer's block is easy to beat. The reason that it's become the boogeyman of the creative world is simple. It's not one problem. It's a whole bunch of different problems that people all call the same thing, and naturally become very, very difficult to treat. Imagine if all the different diseases that all require different cures when you go to a doctor were all labeled as, the patient is sick. And one doctor says, oh, I usually cure sickness by prescribing, this type of medication. And somebody say, well, I usually cure sickness by cutting off an arm. I mean, this is what at first was reason why that being a doctor didn't really help so much. In the 17th century, you weren't really better off for going to the doctor. People had not independently identified the illnesses. However, when someone's life is on the line, we develop ideas a lot faster when it's just our own creative process on the line. Similarly, imagine if car repair worked this way. There's a lot of reasons that a car could break down and no longer be running, effectively just not be moving forward. It might be literally blocked by a physical obstruction. There might be something wrong with the engine. Maybe there's no gas in the tank. Now, if any of these things were all called car block, it'd be very hard to be a car mechanic. Luckily, we individually figure out what all these different problems are, and we give them all different names. Then we can start solving each one individually. When you have one type of disease, the doctor gives you medication A. When you have a different type of disease, the doctor just says, sleep it off, you'll be fine tomorrow. That is extremely, extremely helpful. It's essential to getting the problem solved. I could do a whole podcast, probably several, on where the different problems in creative processes can show up and how to fix them. But that's not today. We're going to just focus on the two most common problems that can block even a highly motivated and focused writer. The first is being lost. The second is being empty. When you're lost, you don't know where to go. You might have a lot of great ideas, but you're not sure which is the right one for your story. When you're empty, you might know exactly what your story needs, but you don't have any idea which fills that need. Think of ideas like differently shaped pegs, and your story's needs like differently shaped holes. When you're lost, you don't know what the shape of your holes are. When you're empty, you're fresh out of pegs to fill them. When you're both empty and lost, that's terrifying. In fact, being lost with an empty gas tank is the start of many a great horror story. How do we avoid these problems? Very, very simple. We build resources. I create 2 documents that I keep going through any project I'm working on. One is a list of unfilled needs and their associated constraints. I'll make a section called Characters Needed, and I'll put Ishida's love interest under there right now, along with any information about her that I already have. For example, the fact that she needs to travel with the group will be very important in building her character. Not all characters can believably tag along with a group of death-defying adventurers through a haunted island. That puts constraints over what the proper shape of the peg I'll need to be to fill that hole. My second document is called an idea pool. This is where I gather cool ideas, plots, characters, names, riddles, anything that could possibly find its way into the campaign. I will keep building both of these documents over the course of the project, matching up the needs in document A to the awesome ideas in the idea pool, document B. It's time to start building Raven Shadow's idea pool. This does not mean sitting back in an armchair brainstorming cool stuff. Like all storms, lightning tends to strike the highest point, and the highest point at the top of your head is every book you've ever read and every game you've ever played. The lightning rods of brainstorms are cliches. Worse, genre-neutral cliches. Cliches that will rob your work of its identity because you've seen them so many times across so many different mediums. We counter this with research. Become your genre's biggest fan. Raven Shadow is based on gothic horror, tragic legends, and stories of light overcoming darkness. I'm going to dive into stories, myths, fables, poems, movies, even music videos that evoke these feelings and work within this genre. Whenever I see a great character concept, a powerful plot twist, or chilling piece of scenery, I'm going to add it to my idea pool, usually with a hyperlink so that I can go back to the original source material when I can. I'll usually end up modifying or improving upon the inspiration to work better in my project, of course, but this is where you get your raw materials to work with. Now, The way that I often start is by Googling top 10 lists, as well as top 10 underrated lists of whatever I'm looking for. Google top 10 gothic horror stories, top 10 underrated gothic horror stories. Then read a plot synopsis for each of them. I've mentioned before that the essence of stories are events. This is why you can tell a story with just words, just pictures, really any form of communication that can present a series of events. A plot synopsis is a summary of the events of a story. It's the story's blueprint. This gives you the essential building blocks of why that story works and leaves a lot of room for you to fill in the gaps. It also lets you sample dozens of ideas across a single afternoon. I would end up paying special attention to the Chinese legend of the White Snake, the Prepare to Cry series of character studies on the NPCs in the Dark Souls series, and a romanticized serial killer novel called Heartsick, as well as the creepy footnotes explaining Fae escapades in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I'll also pay a lot of attention to music during my creative process. Songs in musical theater are often designed to present a character or a situation or a location to the audience. Music makes you feel a feeling. Words make you think a thought. A song with words can make you feel a thought. Also, because songs are often only a few minutes long, you can sample dozens of them in a work session. And yes, Disney musicals like The Lion King count. Musical theater is usually devoid of subtext. It will say flat out what a character is thinking and feeling, and what that character or place is all about. This is great fuel for your creative work. So, for example, in Raven Shadow, I looked up a list of the top 10 Disney villain songs, and I found Hellfire from The Hunchback of Notre Dame at the top of the charts. This song is extraordinarily powerful, and it became the basis in different ways for two of my characters. It also led me to the opening of that musical, which I have never seen, by the way, called The Bells of Notre Dame. This song starts off, or rather very close to the opening, by saying, "Listen, and Grandpa will tell you a tale. It is a tale of a man and a monster." The song then goes out to show Jean-Claude Frollo, the righteous judge who sees corruption everywhere except within, as he murders an innocent fleeing gypsy woman and is about to murder her disgusting, deformed child before he's basically guilted into raising the child as his own to compensate for the blood he just has on his hands. And he's worried about, of course, going to hell for that. Now, even in this act of mercy that he's using to atone for his sins, he gives the child a cruel name, Quasimodo, which means half-formed. That's sick. Even in his mercy, he's being cruel. And then, where the song says to the audience, "Here is a riddle to guess if you can. Who is the monster and who is the man?" What a powerful, almost Dr. Seussian way to get to the heart of the problem. What makes a man? What makes a man a monster? And that would become incredibly influential in my adaptation of the White Snake fable that I mentioned earlier, which deals with a similar theme. So this song, even though I already had that legend, this song helped me cut to the theme, the core idea of what made that romance story so powerful. Don't worry, I'll go into detail about this White Snake fable when it becomes relevant to the rest of the plot. Now I want to go into one more song because it was incredibly influential in shaping my approach to Catherine, the Lich, Nathan's wife. There's a musical called Next to Normal, in which a woman is haunted by the memory of her dead son. Now, that's very similar to Nathan being haunted by the memory of his dead wife. Of course, he's being literally haunted by her. Now, in the musical, we see the son repeatedly throughout the show, and it's only revealed later on that he's actually been dead and is a delusion all along. However, he's not a perfect memory, or at least not a very positive one. Listen to some of these lyrics. This is a song that the son himself sings when explaining who he is. "I am flame and I am fire. I am destruction, decay, and desire. I'll hurt you. I'll heal you. I'm your wish, your dream come true, and I'm your darkest nightmare too. I've shown you. I own you. And though you've made me, you can't change me. I'm the perfect stranger that knows you too well. I'm alive." It's a very cheerful song. The song is all about upbeat and energy, but the lyrics put the lie to it, which is what's so powerful. And this core idea that he wishes nothing more, Nathan wishes nothing more than his wife to be alive again. And she is, in a twisted way. She's literally haunting him. She's his wish, his dream come true, and she's his darkest nightmare too. Now, this twisted logic of this memory of the child also wanting to hurt but heal, be positive and negative, destructive and desirable all at once, this abusive relationship is incredibly interesting and fits and really shaped the way that I considered Catherine's character. Nathan's wife has been driven mad by her tortured transformation into a lich. This adds a real sense of depth to her hatred of Nathan. She's not just angry at him, she loved him. But that love has been twisted by anger and madness, but it still exists, it's not gone. Pain has become inseparable from affection for this woman. She wants to destroy him and also to keep him. She wants to punish him, but also to be with him. It's amazingly messed up, and it comes straight from this song. It's a completely different relationship, but it's equally as complex. Nathan wants nothing more than to have his wife back. He's been haunted by her memory. Now it's literal. This is really, really strong. It also intersects perfectly with the romanticized serial killer novel Heartsick and her relationship, the serial killer's relationship, to the cop that's chasing her. This ends up intersecting and interweaving with all sorts of different things that I'm finding. Just as the Bells of Notre Dame intersects in theme and reinforces my understanding of the White Snake fable, so does the Heartsick novel interlace and intersect with my understanding of this song. And as you start finding these common ideas that are powerful within your genre, you can do a lot of great things. You've got fantastic fuel to work with. However, music is more than a goldmine for creative inspiration. It's also the basis of your campaign's soundtrack. Movies and video games both use soundtracks to huge effect, and it's incredibly easy for a tabletop campaign to do so as well. This is not a tool we should be abandoning. While you don't usually get moments of silence to focus on the music the way that you do during movies or video games, well, unless you're setting up miniatures or bringing out a new map, background music is great to have playing while you speak. Just make sure it doesn't pull too much focus so people can still pay attention to what you're saying. The golden rule is not to use songs with lyrics that anyone at the table can easily understand, unless for some reason they fade into the background. Just try playing it and delivering some improvised exposition or dialogue and see if you have trouble focusing on what you're saying. If you're going to have trouble focusing on what you're saying, they're going to have trouble focusing on what you're saying too. If it's easy, if you don't notice any problem at all, it's probably fine. Now, I'm going to want tracks for various places, characters, even particular plot moments. Darth Vader and the shark from Jaws both benefit from their theme music playing right before they enter. I'll want something similar for each of my major villains. I'm also going to want individual soundtracks for various locations. I mean, individual tracks, not necessarily a whole soundtrack for an individual location. Hallowed Ground will need its own theme music, as does the Jester's Carnival and the Wild Bone Desert, etc. Using background music to express a location is a great way to introduce a sense of place into your adventures. We don't leave the table. We don't always have visual aids or maps. But music that feels like it matches the surrounding area can create a real sense of place as you move from location to location throughout an adventure. I can tell you, in the final campaign, I could generate a physical wave of relief around the table whenever I shifted the soundtrack to Hallowed Ground. The players instantly knew they were safe, and the feeling was magnified by the music. You would just see them slump in relief across the table when they finally managed to get away from the things that were chasing them or the wild fear of death and reach Hallowed Ground. For the record, the song that I used for Hallowed Ground as a whole was the Hymn of the Cherubim by Tchaikovsky. You can find a beautiful rendition of it on YouTube via the USSR Chamber Choir, which is the exact recording that I used. It's really worth a listen. However, my real breakthrough came when I started listening to spiritual songs in Hebrew and Yiddish. Most of our modern languages come from Latin, but Hebrew doesn't. It's the last living Canaanite language and sounds truly foreign to people who haven't been exposed to it, or at least aren't regularly exposed to it in their daily life. The words and sounds are simply unrecognizable. They don't have an easy corollary with English, which serves beautifully as a base for a mysterious island's culture. Meanwhile, Yiddish is an outgrowth of Hebrew mixed with Aramaic, 9th century German, and a dash of the Romance languages. Hebrew lyrics would form the basis of the island's uncorrupted communities, whereas any location directly associated with the jester, Nikolai, would end up being performed in Yiddish. This creates a sense of connection between the two songs, creating a cohesive feeling of my overall story, but also allows the jester to sound unique, whimsical, and harsher. It would feel and sound connected to Hebrew, the same way that the jester, of course, used to be a normal person, but just as Yiddish was mixed with other things that were harsher and more varied, so has the jester become more wild, threatening, and untamed. Which doesn't mean that Yiddish itself is threatening, just that it's great to have that mix of added harsh elements in language connected to the older, ancient Hebrew, the way that the jester himself is an altered version of the normal people of the setting. As such, Hebrew music would be perfect when they were visiting a village or meeting innocent normal people, whereas Yiddish music would be used for any location dominated by the jester or his influence. This also had one added benefit that you have to listen to understand. I'm going to play you a little section from what became the jester's theme.
Sprei sich mir mit Kiche tritt. Hoi noch a Viertel zum Jarid, Hoi mit dem Teister kling ich mir. Und a Lieder sing ich mir. Dai, 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 dai. Dai, 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 dai. Dai, 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 dai,
Did you hear that? Die, die, die? That's creepy, right? In Yiddish, the word die is used like we use the word law in a song. It's a nonsense syllable. It doesn't mean anything. Just like we might sing fa la 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 la. They sing die 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 die. But even if you know that, which my players did not, they did not know that, which was even better. But even if you do, it's very difficult to forget what the word die normally means to you. The eventual reaction was absolutely incredible. They were hardly blinking whenever that song came on. In fact, it actually sabotaged a beautiful moment I'd had planned, because I made the mistake of using for that moment a wonderful, beautiful, mournful song performed by the same singer. The players associated his voice, even though it was in English, they associated his voice so strongly with the jester and these creepy, macabre melodies crooning for them to die, 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 because that, of course, is a nonsense syllable that was present in many of the songs I used, that they couldn't enjoy a sweet song by the same performer. By the way, that song came from the Klezmatics album Possessed. I ended up buying the album and used many of its songs throughout the campaign. I'd highly recommend picking it up for use in your own campaigns whenever you're looking for the similar feeling to what I just played. And of course, many different songs. I want to talk about one last major element that showed up during my early research, the idea of authorship. Authorship. Over the course of various movies, synopses, books, references, and so on, I kept coming across the idea of an author as a powerful, sometimes malevolent, godlike force. It started with my focus on Shakespeare. Shakespeare is a titanic figure when we're talking about him, as the show Slings and Arrows had been one of my driving motivations to dive deep into drama for this campaign in the first place. And Slings and Arrows is all about the theater company trying to find the meaning and power of Shakespeare and unleash it on an unsuspecting audience. I also came across songs and horror stories involving a malevolent author intending a tragedy for his characters, and the characters naturally not wanting that to happen. This really came to life when researching lists of underrated Gothic horror TV series. One of those lists of, again, underrated Gothic horror TV series featured an anime called, and I swear this is real, Princess Tutu. It's an anime about ballerinas. Naturally, I was skeptical. I decided to check YouTube for any AMVs, which are animated music videos, about the show. AMVs are a great inspiration fuel for me, for all the reasons that songs are, plus you also get the striking and evocative imagery of an unrelated anime. I'm an anime fan. But I wasn't sure I'd find anything for this anime. I mean, I've never heard of it. It's called Princess Tutu. It's about ballerinas. But there was a top result, the moment I checked YouTube for it, of Princess Tutu AMVs called On Mig Nu. That was the song. It translates roughly to Hold Me Now. I clicked on it, and the next 3 minutes became my most returned to piece of source material for the rest of Raven Shadow. I rewatched a lot of videos, I re-listened to a lot of poems and songs, I reread a lot of synopses during this process. I must have hit this replay button 30 or 40 times. Sometimes I would just have it on a second screen, playing over and over again while I worked on some overarching theme. It was amazing. It captured the feeling I was going for perfectly. Perfectly. I can't do this video justice. You should just Google it. Princess Tutu, AMV, Hold Me Now. Check YouTube. The video captures the precision and elegance of a ballet, of course, which is often, by the way, a portrayal of tragic stories, and interweaves it with a gothic horror tale of an evil author whose fiction comes to life. And this author only writes tragedies. The imagery and music is sinister, haunting, but dignified and elegant, with the innocent, childlike anime style capturing a sense of innocence, which serves as a perfect counterpoint for the rest of what's going on. There's even a major Raven theme. It just looks perfect for the high-cultured horror of Raven Shadow. Dignity is huge in Raven Shadow's horror. This and the precise orchestration of the ballet, movements, and animating styles was just wonderful. Cannot begin to tell you how good this was for what I was going for. Now, I realized the relationship between this wicked author's intending tragedy and his self-aware protagonists. Again, wicked author intending tragedy, but his protagonists are self-aware. The writer writes events that happen, but the people are free to react to those events. This author does not have perfect control over his characters. They're trying to resist their tragic ends. Does that sound like anything? It's a GM and their players. The players are not under the GM's control. He's trying to write a story, then the players have their own force of will. That's what we've been grappling with these last few episodes. I'm not trying to write a linear story, though. I'm a good GM. I want my players to have an amazing experience. This is an evil GM. He wants his players to experience tragedy, misery. He's sadistic. This is the things that those characters are fighting against. They are characters in a story, and their fates are tragic. And they're trying to resist those tragic ends. It seems like a hopeless struggle, which makes the struggle itself even more meaningful. That's an idea that I brought in from Dark Souls. The fact that everything seems so hopeless and everyone's saying you're going to fail is what makes it more meaningful to strive against that anyway. The player in Dark Souls brings the hope. The setting doesn't provide any for them. They are against their setting on a philosophical level, not just on a narrative level, or on a gameplay level where they're struggling against the obstacles. This is powerful. The idea of rebelling against the possibility of tragedy is one thing, but rebelling against a fated tragedy, against fate itself, the will of your author, it becomes almost subversive to survive. The Shade thus evolved in my mind, becoming a representation of a wicked GM. an arrogant, powerful force that operated literally from the shadows, influencing the villains and the environment as they sought to manipulate the players to their tragic doom. I might have mentioned echoes of this before, but it was because of this revelation, that whole thing about the Shade took shape. I'd also use this theme of tragic authorship more literally, invoking the classic tragedies with a Shakespeare-like character I called Casimir. Casimir would be presented as the greatest tragic playwright and poet of the setting's history, having lived hundreds of years ago before vanishing on one of his many adventures, a traveling bard. However, unbeknownst to the players, the tragic author didn't die. He'd been captured by the Shade and given a magic book and eternal life. Like in the source material, the events he writes in this book come to pass. But, despite his every effort, his stories still end in tragedy. Always. Always. No matter what he does, something happens that makes them end in tragedy. The tragic author is trying his hardest to write a happy ending, and is doomed to watch the misery he mastered come to pass over and over and over again, breaking his own heart every time. This is also an idea I got from the feudal struggle of Count von Strahd. I think it's, God, I feel so bad now that I'm remembering, Baron von Strahd Zarovic from Castle Ravenloft. This guy's main deal, this vampire's main deal, is that his shadowy powers, the powers that run his little land, basically keep giving him what he wants most of all, the love of his life, keep coming back to him and keep coming back to life. But always, whenever he tries to be with her, it ends in tragedy in a various way. And he always tries again when he sees her reincarnated, every single time. But it always ends in tragedy. Now, I captured that idea, and I helped move it and imported it over to this idea of the tragic author who's trying to write a happy ending. So again, I take a cool concept, which is the evil tragic author, and I split it in two. One being the Shade, capturing the motivation and stylings of the tragic author figure, and the other being Casimir, who is a victim of the Shade and is trapped by his own tragic writing. Eventually, after centuries of writing tragedies that keep coming to pass despite his best intentions, swearing he won't do it again, finding himself doing it again, hoping this time he'll get it right, eventually he casts the book away and cuts off his own hands in order to ensure that he could never write in it again. He's still on the island, and some of the island's characters will of course be of his own creation, fictional, and would vanish the moment the book was destroyed. Who are these characters? How will they tie into the setting? How will they tie into my players' stories? I'm not sure at this point. It's possible that he won't fit anywhere, and I'll actually leave him out of the setting, but it's a powerful idea. I added it to my idea pool. Thanks for listening. Next episode is going to be awesome. I invited Mark Yolim, the writer and designer of the extraordinary Primordia adventure game, which you should all check out in preparation. It's a crazy, crazy good point-and-click adventure game that came out several years ago, and it's one of the best examples of the entire genre. Even if you don't like point-and-click adventure games, that's fine. The story alone is more than worth it. I literally almost froze to death while playing this game because I didn't want to leave and go get heat. That's barely an exaggeration. So, I've invited him for the next podcast. He's coming on, and we're going to talk all about world building and other stuff related to game writing. So it's going to be absolutely fantastic. And then after that, of course, we're going to get back into Raven Shadow, and we'll see how all the pegs that I've outlined here, and more, of course, to come, start finding their way into their holes. You're going to see all the preparation work we've done, find its structure, stitch together, and create the first of these multi-layered adventure structures that lead to Raven Shadow. Thanks again, and see you later. Also, now is a great time to leave the show a like, a 5-star review, or share the podcast with your friends. Okay, for real this time. Bye, guys.